Hello, Horror Nights and family, and welcome back to my YouTube channel, your home for scary movie reviews that I upload every single Wednesday and Saturday. You look so nice today. It's so nice seeing all of your beautiful faces. That literally made no sense, but thank you so much for being here. And it must be Wednesday, which means we're going to be talking about a horror movie. And I am so excited for this in-depth review of The Night House that you guys picked. So let's do it. All right, horror fam, we're going to be talking about The Night House. In this video, I'm going to be doing an in-depth review, and after, I'm going to be giving you my overall opinion, my favorite and least favorite characters, and an explanation of the ending. Also, there are timestamps in case you want to skip to the end or skip around or do whatever you want. So a quick summary of the film. A widow begins to uncover her recently deceased husband's disturbing secrets. Warning, this video contains lots and lots of spoilers, so if you haven't seen The Night House, I encourage you to go watch it and then come back. All right, let's get started. So the film opens with the sound of water, and we are greeted with a home overlooking a lake. We are introduced to the home of Beth and Owen, and we can gather from what we see that Owen is an architect of some kind, and that he is now dead. Beth arrives home after his funeral, and is dealing with the immense amount of grief, and is numbing the pain with alcohol. She is holding her dead husband's suicide note, and watching their wedding video. While trying to sleep that same night, she hears an ominous knock on her front door, but sees that nothing is there. But we can see this very eerie, weird shadow of a man in the reflection of the door behind her. And there are lots of these very strange eye tricks throughout the entire film. Beth is now leaving for work, but before she does, she notices that her gate is open that leads to the dock, and she sees muddy footprints that look fresh. She then hears a gunshot in the distance, and it sounds like it's coming from the other side of the lake. Beth arrives at work, and we can see that she is a high school teacher, and it's the end of the school year. We then meet her best friend, Claire, who seems to be very caring and genuine. We then get this weird, awkward, but effective interaction between Beth and one of her students' mothers. And we learn through this exchange that Beth's husband shot himself in the mouth in the small rowing boat in the middle of the lake. So after that exchange, Beth is now home, and she sees that her gate dock is open again. But it's her neighbor Mel who's the culprit now. And he also seems to be very caring and genuine with his relationship with Beth. She then asks him if he heard a gunshot earlier that morning, but he says he didn't. It is now later that evening, and Beth is watching more home videos of her and Owen. But then she decides her time is better spent packing away his things and throwing some of it away. And while she is doing this, she comes across his sketchbook that shows blueprints of his work. And as she is looking through his sketchbook, we are seeing these weird, ominous notes in it, like trick it, don't listen to it. And it looks from the blueprints that he's building some kind of maze and a mirror of their current home, but it's reversed. And we're going to get into more of that later. It is now dark and Beth is sleeping, but she is awoken by the stereo downstairs turning on. She then hears her phone ping, and it's a text from her dead husband, telling her in all caps to come down and not to be afraid, but then the music shuts off. She then calls her dead husband on the phone, and we hear this crackling static noise that's saying her name. And we can assume that this is Owen's voice, and it tells her to look out the window. And when she does this, she sees Owen naked, standing on top of the water of the lake. But before anything could happen, the scene cuts and she wakes up on the floor of her bathroom. She then grabs her phone and sees that the text message exchange between her and Owen is not there anymore. She then goes out to her car, and we see that she has a box of Owen's things that were given to her after he shot himself, including the gun that he used, his clothing, and his cell phone. And she looks for the text exchange on his phone too, but there's nothing there either. She then looks through the photos on his phone and sees a photo of a woman that she doesn't recognize, but it looks oddly like her. She's now confiding in Claire, her friend, about the photo that she found, and she's convinced that it's not her. We also get some insight from Claire on Beth and Owen's relationship. Basically, he loved her and he worshipped her and he would have done anything for her, and how he would never cheat on her. But Claire also does say that everybody does have their secrets. Claire then invites Beth to go out with some of their colleagues later that night. So while they're out, Beth then asks her colleagues if they believe in ghosts and tells them that something is in her house, a presence, that something is watching her. And we also learn that Owen used to sleepwalk a year or two after they built their house. So this whole scene was a little difficult to watch because we have these teachers who are trying to blow off some steam because it's the end of the school year. But it turns into more of this kind of interrogation on Beth, asking her how she didn't realize that anything was wrong with her husband before he killed himself. And here is where we learn that Beth has struggled with depression and dark thoughts, and how Owen helped her keep them at bay. And here is where we learn what Owen wrote in his suicide note. And she pulls it out of her purse. It reads, "You were right. There is nothing. Nothing is after you. You are safe now." And that's it. No XOXO, no love you. So Claire then decides it's best if the two should leave. And we can see that Claire is very worried about her friend, as any of us would be. She then confides in Claire while they're back at Beth's home that she died. She was 17 years old and she was in high school. And a friend was driving and they flipped over the side of a mountain. And Beth's lungs were crushed. She was airlifted out and her heart stopped beating for 4 minutes. And during those 4 minutes, she tells Claire that she saw nothing. No light at the end of a tunnel, just tunnel. Nothing. And she tells Claire that her and Owen used to kind of fight about the afterlife. But then Beth says this line that you can't unknow what you already know. Okay, so about 38 minutes into the film, we get probably one of the scariest jump scares that I have ever seen in a horror film. As Beth is going to sleep, she is awakened by her stereo turning on again and something telling her to wake up and go to the door. What I really enjoy about the character of Beth is she is basically going against all horror tropes because she isn't scared of whatever it is that is in her house or whatever it is that's haunting her. We can assume that she thinks it's her husband, but we're going to get into that a little bit later, so stay tuned. As Beth is looking outside, we see ghosts of women running around her and jumping off the ledge into the lake below. And I'll be honest with you guys, this scene just definitely freaked me out too. She then sees a light on in a house across the lake, and a voice is telling her to go to the boat. She then looks into the boat, and we see that is her husband's suicide scene, and bloody footprints are leading off the dock. She closes her eyes and she asks Owen for a sign that he's there as more bloody footprints appear in front of her, and she feels like something like go past her. We then get this like really cool scene of something moving over Beth, and she is now in the boat floating out into the lake. I also want to make a note that the moon has this really eerie red glow, which we're going to talk about later. Beth is then jolted awake and she sees that she's in the boat, looking up into the other house across the lake. She makes her way towards it and sees the lights are on, and someone whispers that she is dreaming. Now, when I say someone is whispering and these things that are talking to her, it is the same voice that we hear throughout the film that we can assume is Owen. She then sees someone who might be her looking out the window and sees that Owen is now behind this woman. So as she's making her way closer and going into the house, we see that the house number is mirrored, so it's backwards. Beth goes to unlock the door, and she is greeted with herself sleeping on the couch. And the scene cuts and we go back to daylight. So at this point, Beth is trying to figure out what is going on. So she finds Owen's laptop and is looking at his photos, and we can see that he has a folder called Other. And inside there are more photos of women that look exactly like her. Beth is now walking to where she thinks this house is located that she saw in her dream, but Mel, the neighbor, crosses her path and asks if she is all right. And Beth kind of like brushes him off and asks him if he knows of a house. And we can sense that Mel is worried about her, and he lies to her about knowing where this other house is. So Beth then continues on her little hike, and she spots something through the dents of the forest. It is a house, but it looks kind of just like the skeleton of a house, like it's not finished yet. She ventures inside, and she finds this very jarring sculpture of a woman contorted with spikes coming out of her. So Beth, who is overwhelmed by the things that she found, she's now at Mel's, and she brought back this weird figurine with her, asking Mel what it is and what Owen was building. So then Mel tells her he used to see Owen wandering out in the dark from time to time, and how he promised Owen that he would never tell Beth. She then demands Mel tell her everything, as I would probably do that too. And Mel tells Beth that he caught Owen with a woman that he thought was Beth, but it wasn't her because this woman looked very much like Beth. He then explains that Owen confided in him, that he had these dark, shameful urges. We also get our first insight that after Owen does whatever it is that he does to like calm his urges, that he and Beth are good. They're fine. They're happy. We will touch on that a little bit later, so definitely stick until the end. He then says this really cryptic line to Beth. He says, "You are closer to death than you ever have been before." So now Beth is home, and she is pretty much ransacking all the boxes that she packed of Owen's things, looking for answers to what her husband was doing while he was alive. She then finds this book, and I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm not even going to try, but here it is. And inside, we learn about this weird sculpture. It's called a Louvre doll, and is essentially a voodoo doll that binds offerings to the sculpture for delivery, and how simple mazes and reverse spaces are intended to weaken or confuse dark forces. Oh, and we can see that Beth has decided to take this sculpture back with her to her home. And we can definitely sense that this thing has some dark forces attached to it, because we hear like creaking above her after she hits it off of her desk. Beth once again goes to investigate these noises, and we see those odd eye tricks happen again with like the things inside of her home. So now we see that Beth has done a little bit of digging into the books that she found, and the bookstore where Owen had originally bought the book. As she is asking about the books to the clerk, she spots the woman that she saw in her husband's phone right there in between the bookshelves. Her name is Madeline, and she works there. So she goes and confronts Madeline, and she brings up her husband. And we can see that Madeline is getting a little anxious. But then Beth tells her that he, himself. But then we find out that Madeline and Owen's relationship was not what Beth was assuming. Apparently, Madeline and Owen just went out for drinks and that was it. So in the next scene, Beth is now confiding in Claire about the exchange and like what Mel the neighbor told her and all these women that Owen was interacting with that looked like her. Claire, then still worried about her friend, offers her home for Beth to stay at. But Beth declines, saying that she's going to pack a few things and go stay at a hotel. And then she goes home, promising to call Claire later. Beth is now back home and she's telling the spirit or this thing that's inside of her house that she's leaving. And if it wants to tell her something, it needs to do it sooner than later. She then hears very ominous knocking again, but it's Madeline. And we learn that Madeline has been in that home before. So the reason that Madeline has made the journey to Beth and Owen's home is because she had a very strange dream that something was chasing Beth. And she felt so uneasy after the dream that she had to come and tell Beth that there was more to the story. Owen apparently had invited Madeline up to their house for like a day trip. And then they took a walk over to the other house. Owen then told Madeline to hold this odd statue that keeps making its appearance in this whole story. But then she tells Beth that Owen did nothing to her. But then she tells Beth that they kissed and he put his hands around her neck and started squeezing. But when Madeline told him to stop, he stopped. And he told her that whatever he was doing wasn't working anymore, but he knew what he had to do. He had to end it for good. Madeline leaves and Beth is alone again, and she is venturing back into the woods to the other house, and of course it's raining. What I really like about Beth is that she's not really afraid of anything anymore. She has these really funny moments of like smirking and laughing to herself as all these weird things are happening around her. Like she knows she probably looks and sounds crazy, but she's just going with it. She is now inside the other house and she's egging on the spirit of her dead husband, asking for answers. Her foot then falls through the floor and she sees that underneath the house is littered with dead bodies. The dead bodies of the women that were in the photos, the dead bodies that looked exactly like Beth. She then immediately calls Claire and leaves her a voicemail telling her that she should have listened to her and how she saw something in the other house. Beth is now taking a shower and we can see that she is clearly traumatized by what she saw. And we see the stereo turn on and then shut off again. She is now pleading with the spirit to come back. And she sees the word "here" on her bathroom mirror. Then we get this really interesting scene where Beth hears footsteps behind her and essentially feels like physically feels the spirit of her dead husband all around her. She's able to touch him and embrace him. She also hears his voice around her as well. But then she asks, "Is this Owen?" And this is where we find out that it is not Owen at all. The bathroom door then slams and locks, and Beth sees the reflection in the mirror is not her own, but someone, of course, that looks very much like her. She is now watching this scene play out in front of her husband killing this woman. Then this entity or dark force is now smashing Beth's head into the mirror, and Beth stumbles out of the bathroom. So at this point, she is now seeing that everything around her is reversed. It's mirrored. And something tells her to hide. She is now watching Owen tie up this woman while the entity or this dark force is watching. And as she is running through the reversed house, she is seeing all these different scenes of her husband with different women killing them. And this dark force is watching Beth. The dark force is now dragging Beth across the floor, and she is looking in on a scene of her and Owen during Christmas. She is asleep on the couch, and this Owen, who clearly isn't Owen, is telling her she left the night they met and how this is what she felt the night her heart stopped and she felt and saw nothing. This dark force then tells her that it has never left her since that night, and how it went to her husband and how it whispered in his ear over and over again to send her back. But Owen couldn't and sent it them instead, the women that looked like her, to trick it. Then we see this entity take hold of Beth, and start lifting her up into the air and contorting her into the figure of the statue. And she also has this red glow on her like we saw earlier with the moon. Beth's eyes then roll into the back of her head, and the scene ends. The next morning, we see that Claire is at Beth's home to make sure Beth is okay because remember, Beth left her a voicemail. She goes inside and she sees the broken bathroom mirror and that the sliding glass door is open. And she is shouting Beth's name, and Mel also hears this too. And Claire also sees that Beth has taken the gun her husband used on himself. It seems also that Beth is still in this really strange, demonic trance, and she is now on the boat with Owen the night that he killed himself. She is watching the scene kind of play out in front of her as Owen has the gun, and Beth asks the Dark Force where Owen is now, and the Dark Force says he is gone. You already know that. Claire then sees Beth outside in the lake by herself, floating in the boat. The gun is now in Beth's hands as Mel and Claire are running to save her. And the scenes kind of cut back and forth between reality and this trance world as we watch Beth decide whether she wants to live or die. But then we see Beth drop the gun and come back to reality. And Claire is helping Beth get safely back to the dock. And Mel pulls them out. She tells Claire that she is here and the two embrace. And as Beth looks back out to the boat, we can see that something is still there. A faint outline of someone that only she can see. And the film ends. All right, guys, opinion time. And I'm sorry if my mood during the whole in-depth review, if you watch it, was a little more serious than normal. But I'm going to get into that because I feel like this film, it kind of needed that. So essentially the film is about grief and dealing with grief and the story of Beth losing her husband of 14 years to his suicide. It is essentially a love story intertwined with very, very dark, creepy, unsettling scenes. I really, really liked this film with a simple storyline, but it evolved into so much more. So after losing her husband, Beth wants some answers. She wants closure, as anyone would want dealing with someone so close to them so suddenly and shocking. She unraveled this entirely different side of her husband, who essentially was trying to protect her from nothing. I am interpreting nothing as the Dark Force's name. If we go back to the suicide note, it sounds different depending on your inflection of it. So if we read it as, you were right, there is nothing. Nothing is after you. You're safe now. So to make a little bit more sense, I'm going to change the word nothing to darkness. So it would read then, you were right, there is darkness. Darkness is after you. You're safe now. So Owen knew that this dark force was after his wife, and he did everything he could to protect her, even committing murder over and over again to protect her. He heard the dark force whispering in his ear at times when Beth's depression was at its highest and at its worst. And to keep the depression quiet and keep Beth safe, he would lure women that looked like her into this other house and have them touch the figure to bind them and then kill them, essentially tricking the dark force. But over time, the dark force caught on to what he was doing, and it was getting harder and harder to protect Beth. So he concluded that the ultimate sacrifice, his suicide, would end the dark force from hurting and coming after Beth. He assumed that if he was dead, then the force would not be able to get to Beth anymore because it was using him as a tool to get to her. So if you remember back to the conversation between Beth and Madeline, when Beth asks her what Owen did to her, Madeline replies, nothing, period. Which I interpret it as he was using Madeline to trick the dark force. But of course, Madeline had no idea. And when Beth died, she saw what none of us want to see. She saw nothing. She saw darkness. When you want to see light, you want to see something. The absence of something is nothing. AKA the devil, evil, darkness, nothing. Another way to look at it, and this might be a little bit of a stretch, but just stay with me here. Beth's grief and depression was so overwhelming after Owen's death that it triggered her to have hallucinations and lucid dreaming and maybe some kind of sleep paralysis. And we did get this quick scene in the beginning of the film, and it showed medication on a nightstand. We also know that she was drinking very heavily throughout the film, so maybe she was mixing the medication with the alcohol, and it triggered all the things that she was seeing. And maybe Owen was just having affairs and did have these dark urges to kill these women, and he held on to the guilt of his urges, and that the only way to stop himself from killing these women was to kill himself. I know that would change the entire story, but maybe that whole protecting his wife by killing women that looked like her was just in her head. Okay, so let's move on to the characters. I really think that Claire is Beth's guardian angel. Throughout the film, she's explaining to her that sometimes we don't always know the answers, and she was always there for Beth. She also, of course, saved her life at the end by shouting her name, which essentially brought her back into reality. And another reason why I think Claire is her guardian angel is because Claire's voice and her shouting was able to penetrate this dark force, this trance that Beth was in at the end of the film. Okay, so as for Owen, I don't know, his character kind of bothered me a little bit. I think he was kind of an idiot. He killed a lot of innocent women to protect Beth. And I don't really see that as heroic or romantic. I see more of him as being a serial killer. The women that he killed didn't do anything wrong that we know of. They just so happened to look like Beth. He was taking matters into his own hands, and he was doing these murders secretly. Or it's what I mentioned before about how the darkness wasn't even affecting Owen at all. And he just wanted to kill his wife, but instead of killing his wife, he killed women that looked like her. Maybe Owen was just a really evil dude. I know this theory is a little far-fetched, but considering Beth's reality is really, really warped, how do we know that she wasn't making up all that stuff in her head? Like I said, maybe Owen was just a really evil, horrible person. So Mel the neighbor was kind of like a fill-in character, but he definitely helped move the story along. He filled in the gaps of Owen's secret life that we wouldn't have had if he wasn't there, and he, like I said, he did really seem to care about Beth. So Rebecca Hall, who played Beth, was amazing. She was able to have so much emotion in her face and was able to carry us through the entire film. And I never got bored considering that she was in every single scene of this almost 2-hour movie. She just brought so much presence into the film, and it was so believable. Let me know in the comments down below what your interpretation of this film is. Do you agree with me on some of the things I said? What do you disagree with me about? I love having discussion in the comments down below with you guys, so please do not hesitate to comment. And if you like videos like this, be sure to subscribe because I put new videos out every single Wednesday and Saturday. And if there's any horror film that you want me to do an in-depth review on, let me know in the comments down below. All right, friends, I think that's gonna be it for me and this video. And if you like these kinds of videos, I have an entire playlist dedicated to horror movie reviews in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it this far. And you can follow me on all my social media if you want to, and I'll see you soon.